say?
Even when they're off.
Even when they're off. This only illuminates the room. When he goes like this, we're going to get a recording. We're going to get a on-air thing put outside.
Like the radio.
Yeah. Yeah.
I should have this microphone ready. I now call this committee of the whole meeting of the Davenport Community School Board of Directors to order. The only thing we have tonight is the ISB board training. Harry and Luann, are you on the line?
We're on. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Harry, how's it going?
I'm better than I should be. Thank you.
Perfect.
And Luann's here as well.
Hi, everyone.
So before we get started, I'd like to remind everybody that Dan, Linda, myself, we meet with IASB on the last Wednesday of every month to help review the previous month's board meetings and then proactively plan the professional development. So on behalf of us, I'd like to thank the IASB for really assisting putting this training together, onboarding. I think this workshop is going to be valuable for us moving forward. I know that we've talked a lot about that process, that cadence, that routine, and it's becoming really important to us. So I just want to say that that's an excellent process to continue moving forward. Whether the frequency of that cadence moving forward, we can determine. But right now, that once a month is really assisting us to review how we're doing. So Dan, Linda, do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
I think Harry and Luann and sometimes Siobhan and Patty Schroeder have all been excellent resources for them, and I do greatly appreciate the time they dedicate to us and help us out.
So with that being said, I think we'll turn it over to our IASB partners. Harry, can you introduce who is on the line with us tonight?
You bet. Just me, Harry, and Luann. So you're the lucky recipients, or however else you might want to look at it, of Luann and the Harry show. So thank you. And Joe, thank you for your help behind the scenes. I'll cue you up on pages and materials. And here's the big backdrop. So Joe, if you would move to page 2 of the packet, please. The diagram. And board, this is the big setup. So along the way, as TJ and Dan mentioned, we debrief and reflect each month, and we've been building a running list and chipping away things. And board leadership and Superintendent TJ had said this tonight was a good night to pick up with a couple of these topics. So what I would ask us to just reflect on, or to kind of set the stage, is tonight's conversation is about next steps to continue to maximize and optimize information flow. And as you do that, board questions, board requests for information, administration recognition of places to provide more info, all the while that an important filter is going to be how does that information flow, and how do we do that while still keeping our eye on the most important work, our goals, priorities, and the Department of Ed citations. So that's the big backdrop. And as with anything, Lou and I prepped three diagrams or quick visuals here that we'll use as a filter tonight. And Joe, are you able to just transition pull me up on camera for 30 seconds or a minute, and then we'll go back to the slides, please? And thank you. So here's what I want us to think about, and Lou and I both want us to think about as we proceed tonight. On one hand, and you're in the same circumstances boards across the state are, and you have a couple unique circumstances you're in. And so boards everywhere continually bump into, on one end of the spectrum, are we engaged enough? And on the other end of the spectrum, are we over engaged? And what you have said what board leadership has said is part of the feedback a year or so ago from the Department of Ed was looking for increased engagement. And so as you move and do that, there's always this, as the pendulum swings, Dan and Linda often describe it in conversations we've had as how do we keep the pendulum from swinging so far that we're overly involved in trying to look for a balance. That's really what we're after. Then Joe, we can slide back to the visual, please. And so when it comes to information flow, it makes common sense. That top one in the indicated with the lighter colored blue is how much info and what kind of info are we looking for? Are we needing? Are we requesting? And for every person on the board that thinks I have plenty of info, I'm equipped to be able to make a decision coming up, there's likely to be another board member at the other end of the spectrum who would like a lot more information. And so looking for that balance somewhere in there that's going to work for everybody. So that's one filter. And we want to use this tonight as we unpack some scenarios and think about ultimately what that means for your work. So when you think about the left side, amount of information and detail, lacking info, all the way to the right side in abundance, overwhelming. Some board members may say too much info. Would you guys talk for a couple minutes? TJ, are folks close enough that they could talk with another partner, or we can just open this up, Dan and TJ, to the just whole group discussion? What's going to work better for you guys? You know the layout of the room.
We could definitely elbow partner that.
And let's do elbow partner and just talk about that
Karen's
first
laughing.
diagram.
That's the strategy he's very familiar with.
That works great for us. We're familiar with that too. So just talk with an elbow partner. Good luck on that for a minute or two. Where do you think you hope you would operate as a team when you think about this spectrum, the top one in blue? So go ahead and talk with an elbow partner, and then we'll have folks weigh in. And then TJ, would you cue us in when folks have had a chance to talk about that top one, and let's pull back together as a large group for a minute or two.
All right.
We okay to debrief, Dan?
Yeah, we're good. We got them to unlock elbows.
That's sounds good. And Joe, I might ask if you would enlarge that a little bit. We looking at one of the three diagrams at a time, a little bit larger would be good in terms of community or others that happen to be dialed in tonight. So, Dan, would you help guide around the room in terms of would be interested to hear maybe from each partnership just some quick thoughts about where do you think and hope your board would operate on this continuum?
I will go with Director Potts and Director Klein Jerome.
Thank you.
Well, our first conversation, the first points that we mentioned was that we thought there's a possibility that on some issues, Karen and I may have back information that other board members may not have because of the time we spent as district employees. And the other point that we agreed upon was when we shifted and started trying to go to a year-long calendar for board meetings. That was a change from past practice, where we were in a situation where we felt like elements were popping out of a toaster at us at a board meeting, or we wouldn't even see anything until the board agenda was published, and we'd be expected to talk about it and vote on it that night. And we've moved away from that way of doing business to where we're having discussion items at one board meeting that wind up as action items at the next board meeting, giving plenty of notice and time for conversation and questions to be asked.
That's nicely said, and we as a school board association have noticed that as well, Bruce and Karen, and we compliment. We think that's been a good move from our perspective for your board team. Great. Someone else, Dan? Another pair?
We will go to Director Poshner and Director Snyder.
Jamie can jump in here if he doesn't agree with what I thought we kind of discussed. One comment that I made is that in the situation that we're currently in, if I'm going to err on anything, I'm going to err on the side of micromanaging. I think I don't know what the right word is, maybe scared that we're not delving deep enough into some things and then we're missing it along the way, because I think that's happened in the past. I got my eyes opened up when I made the visits to the various school buildings. I think we've got fantastic principals out there, fantastic staff. There is some frustration, but it's good to get out into the buildings and find out, a little bit more about what's going on. And Jamie, I'll let you chime in.
As far as the levels of detail, I think right now, we have more information than we've ever had. Way more than when I was on the board before, at our fingertips. There was lots of things then that we were told that's not our area, and that's in the weeds and stay out of there and blah blah blah, and then we got nailed for it on citations. So I think the information level we have now, I wouldn't call it overwhelming. I would call it appropriate. We get a lot of information from TJ on Fridays. I think it's better than it's been ever.
Thank you. A couple other pairs, Dan?
I will go to Dr. Beck and Superintendent Schneckloff.
Pretty much basically what people have already said, that in the past we were operating on the left side of that spectrum there, where we were asked to vote on things within, having just heard about it, and we had just one meeting to ask questions and make a decision. And now we're much closer to the middle or the right. I also made the point that in some cases, I feel like there are some situations where we do have a huge amount of detail, but it's not necessarily a bad thing because it's information there that we can use if we need it, you know, and what may feel overwhelming to me isn't necessarily overwhelming to somebody else, like the finances. You know, it's sort of, it's also topical, right? We don't need all the detail in the world on some aspects of district functioning, but we need more detail on others. And so I feel like we've kind of started to figure out where the board needs to be best informed, you know, so that we're not getting all the information all the time, but we're not getting no information all the time too.
What I think I'm hearing thus far is in the middle part to maybe more toward the right, given your circumstances and where you found yourself. And again, from Luann's and my perspective, it's not for us to pass judgment on where you are. We're just raising it up to a conscious level as a filter or a lens. Think about these continuums, and we think this tool with these three parts can be a help as you regulate and monitor your own information needs over the next 6 months or year. Yeah, cool. I think there's one more elbow partner group, Dan?
Yes, I will call on Director Hayes.
We pretty much agreed with what everyone else has said as well. Now the meetings are pretty much designed to provide the information and vote on it rather than springing it on the first meeting. Anything that comes up that the group needs to be aware of, that's discussed, so no one's really caught off guard by anything that we're going to talk about, and you anticipate what's going to happen in the future rather than, oh, this is what we're going to do, and we're trying to muddle through it and work through it as best we can. So I think we pretty much just kind of set that design out where it's discussed or planned, discussed, and then voted upon. And all the smaller details, we kind of, even if we have to pass that information through Brenda to give to someone or pass it to TJ to put out on his Friday reports, everyone is pretty much kept abreast of what's going on within the district.
Great, thank you. And again, the purpose of this frame is just to in the workshop tonight is to be able to take a quick step back and say, how are we doing on according to this frame, this continuum, this lens? Dan, anything else you want to add, or we'll slide on to the next one? And we'll move through the next two a little bit faster, but anything else you want to add?
I guess the only thing I'll add, I agree with what everyone has said. I think in the beginning, even, you know, previous years being on the board, there's a lot of lacking information, and now sometimes we get more information on things than we probably need, but I think we get a good a level of information. I know, as even being the president, I try to call and have conversations with board members so they know about things ahead of time and stuff like that, and that's you know, kind of, I feel, helped the process a little bit, but it's better to have too much information than not enough, because it was always feeling rushed on things, and I think it makes our meetings a lot more beneficial. We're getting the right questions asked for the things that we need to ask to be comfortable on voting on things, so.
Great, thank you. And again, Luann and I believe, our organization believes, as you continue moving forward. So the spirit of tonight is looking back a little bit and then projecting out over the next 6-8 months. And we'll encourage you to continue to keep this in mind and come back to it, and periodically use this as a yardstick to ask how we doing. Did we leave anybody out, Dan, or can we slide on to number 2?
I believe Superintendent Schneckloff was wanting to say something.
Please.
I think we've made some really good gains and goals in terms of the information that the board has to make decisions and decision making and understanding of inner workings and finance and things of that nature. It would be great to come back to this same level of information and detail about student data outcomes. So I think I think while we're moving forward, our next step in this area is to say, are you receiving enough information and data about student outcomes, disproportionality, things of that nature? So I think that'll be really important for us while we're developing our process to begin to ask one another.
Which makes a lot of sense. I would just reinforce that, TJ, not only as you move forward and continue to dig deeper into student outcomes, impact on students, but then also use the same continuum periodically. Come back and ask yourselves after you've had a couple more runs with that kind of data, what do we think? Not enough, too much, and you can use that to continue to regulate.
That's a good point.
Joe, if you would please slide up to that middle diagram. This one we're looking at, it seemed to us, this is another one that just having watched several meetings now over the last 4 or 5 months or participating with you a mixture, Luann and I predict this is another area that other boards have to deal with as well, and so do you guys certainly. So the second continuum or filter is to think about as you both request and seek information, whether that's through board requests, through committees, whether it's questions that pop up during board meetings, whether it's questions that pop up in between board meetings, any of those kind of and other scenarios, we think this is another important one to ask yourself. So when I, Harry, board member, am seeking more information, we believe it's an important piece to periodically reflect on. Is the kind of what's the impact? What message am I giving to community? How does it impact how we spend our board time when questions seeking information is more toward the left side? It's around items that are closely aligned with or in close proximity to your goals. Think about your 6 board superintendent goals. Think about the citations, the Department of Ed citations. And when are those times when information data you're seeking might be more over to the right side, quite distant in proximity to your goals or the citations or your priorities? And so I would ask you again, a shorter conversation this time with an elbow partner, but where do you hope you'd operate as a board when you think about board information, data requests, needs, when it's in relation to your goals and priorities? Where do you ultimately hope you want to operate? More toward the left, more toward the middle, more toward the right? Go ahead and talk with your partner again about that and why. Okay. You tell us when. Just looking for at least a couple groups to share some thinking on this one. This is a little different look.
Superintendent Schneckloff.
So I'll speak on behalf of Dr. Beck as I was writing the notes as she was talking. So in the past where there was a void of information, board members would request for information. So where there was a lack of data, where there was a lack of information, that's where a lot of the board requests would come from. So the one statement is where there's a void, it was filled with board requests. And the other part that was really important to Allison is that we can't also squelch creativity and innovation. So sometimes board requests come from a space where there's creativity and innovation. So if we were marking a spot on that continuum that was perfect, it would be just a little bit to the left of the center. That's what kind of the mindset was. We don't want to squelch creativity, but at the same time, there needs to be some alignment to the goals. Did I capture that?
All right, thank you. Somebody else?
I still want to call on Bill Decker and Shane because they were over there having a nice conversation. I don't know if Director Snyder and Poston.
Go ahead.
When Kent and I talked, we feel as a board and as a district in general, we're more to the left by far. We both feel that as a board, we do a pretty good job asking questions, asking the right questions. But also, more importantly, we feel the administration is doing a good job in forecasting what questions we're going to ask. And a lot of that is due to Harry and Luann's coaching with our list of questions, with other things that IASB has helped us with. I think we're just functioning better. There's going to be questions that we have that don't necessarily align with goals at the time, because if generally public asks us something, our the people that elected us, we have an obligation to try and get them an answer as well. We can't just tell them, well, sorry, that doesn't align with one of our goals, so we'll check in with you next year. But I think overall, the majority of the things that we do request or the questions we do ask are on topics that we're discussing at the time, which do fairly align with our goals.
Thanks, Jamie, and that thanks for the minor accolade there, but more importantly, that you guys see yourselves maybe operating more to the left side of central, but everything isn't always going to fit a goal. That both groups nicely said. Dan, a couple more partnerships, and it's even okay if Bill and Shane weigh in somewhere if you guys are good. That's great.
I appreciate you letting me tap them. Director Kleinger.
Bruce and I felt that, and from his time on the board before, he said it's far less board requests that seem to consume a whole lot of time prior to the time I was on here. But we feel it does focus on student achievement, finance, citation concerns, tend to be where our board requests come in. But also, there's a spreadsheet out there, but unless I go through a whole lot of emails to find it, I can't find it. So is there some way that we could get the spreadsheet sent to us more regular, or a place I know where to go get it so that we can look and see what the board requests are? Because I haven't looked at that sheet for a long time.
It's a good idea. We reviewed it before this meeting.
You do, but we.
No, the
Yeah.
board agenda committee.
Right.
It's super easy to send that link out. We can send it to you.
And like I said, I've got it in an email. We all do, but it's very far down, and I would have to hunt a long way to find it. So I'd like to, because somebody makes it, doesn't mean that, a month from now I remember who made what and what we're looking at.
And Karen, I think that's I'm going to jump on that. That's a good example of an opportunity where, again, our work with you guys has been to help support you in self-regulating, monitoring, and figuring out what sticks and works well and stay with that. And so if you take that idea of your your spreadsheet with topics, can you imagine if a couple times a year, each quarter or something, that the board just looked at what's waiting out in the runway? If this were an airport, our runway of requests, and come back and ask yourselves, how do those align with the priority items we're trying to accomplish? And that may help with kind of the sifting and sorting of what ought to be tended to next. That kind of thing? Cool. Somebody else. Dan, please.
Brenda will look at putting that on board docs or something so we can do. Did you guys want to go?
We both have our mics ready to go.
All right.
We'll put it on Bill and Shane.
Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, in our discussion, it was just stating that most requests should be connected to a goal or priority, or it should be a significant and timely topic, and understanding that when you get requests from people in the community, it's hard to say no to people, particularly when it's a topic that's really important to them, it's personal, they're passionate about it. So it does put you in a difficult position to be able to say no. And I think the key thing is to find that balance, and there's going to be a balance for everybody, but understanding that finding the right balance and being ready to course correct and recalibrate if you're going too far to one end or the other.
And then I was going to say, I really liked what Karen was saying, but I'd like to take it one step further and twist a little bit. If you could take the spreadsheet, I'm not aware of that. So it's a spreadsheet of all the board requests that have happened. Mm-hmm. And if you could cross-reference that spreadsheet with the calendar, you're probably going to find a lot of times when the answer to that request is coming. And you could probably say, here, this request, that's going to be answered in January. This request, that's going to be answered next month, and so on and so forth. And then you'd have to ask the question, is January okay? January is quite a ways off. Does that work? Is there a reason why the information is needed sooner than that? But I think that would take those two documents and put them together and make each of them more effective. Just my own observations, I would say that it has been a remarkable difference. I started coming to your board meetings, I'd been to board meetings before, but regularly in October. And the difference between the months of October and November and the months of March and April, it's night and day. Your requests are so much closer in proximity to goals, and somebody else had said it previously. Just the number of requests are not what they used to be. So to me, my observation was there used to be a lot of requests, and many of them were kind of coming out of left field. And if you do that, all that does is it makes TJ and his team's work come out of left field. But that's entirely different. Now you have requests that really a lot of times the requests that I've seen here recently have been just good extensions of the work, just board observations of, hey, if we had this information, it would make that topic even better. So I would commend the board on that transition over the last few months.
In our thinking, Bill, Luann's and mine, and our association was, if we'd have put this diagram up last December, it had a different meaning than it does now. It seemed like this spring, having had time, as TJ mentioned earlier, for the board to get into a cadence and rhythm of getting information ahead of time, Dan and Linda's leadership to get those topics planned out with superintendent across the year, having a calendar, it seemed like now is a good time to ask for reflection on this. Great. Dan, I think we've left out one or two others yet.
I think the only other group is myself and Linda. I could tell you when I first started on the board, I was way over to the right because there was just a lack of information. And I think that's a recurring theme here. I think as we get more information, even with the way the meetings are structured now, where we have the discussion ahead of time and we're able to go around and ask if board members need more information to feel comfortable voting on something, I think that's helped out a lot too. So I would say we're a lot closer to the left. And I can say I was an habitual offender of just throwing board requests out there because we weren't getting that information. So it is a world of difference now. And like I said, the board requests are, on student achievement, finances, and things like that now, the things that we should be working towards. So it's been a nice change over the last little bit. It sucks how we got here, but we're here, and it's been nothing but beneficial. So
That's good. And again, we think that this middle continuum, along with the first one, will be helpful pieces when you use them in the ways you guys have just described, taking next steps. Anyone else, Dan, or we'll take a peek at the last one, and then we'll apply these to a couple scenarios, and then most importantly, we'll spend the last part of this workshop talking about this meeting. What's this mean for you guys? Next step. So, anyone else around the room, or we'll slide on to the third one?
I'm not seeing no hands going up, Harry. So I'm thinking we'll go ahead and slide on to the next one.
All right, great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for moving us forward. This one, Luann and I would say this is the third one at the bottom of the page is a little bit different animal, and it's not. There's a reason it's third, because from our perspective, the first two, the top one and the middle one, were the heavy hitters. This is also important, but this one, it's more the impact of the board's needs and desires for information. And again, any board team, any board superintendent leadership group faces this, and we think it's another important lens to as whether it's board requests, questions that pop up at the meeting, questions that pop up at a committee meeting that might mean Superintendent TJ or somebody from the administrative cabinet needs to sort more info, questions that arise after presentation, all those circumstances, we think it ends up leading to this, and we believe this is another important filter, is on the left side, and again, this is a spectrum or continuum. The likely impact as whether it's any of those methods of requesting info is on some items, it's going to be low, existing, factual, might be information that already exists. Or as Bill Decker mentioned, it may be info that's already being prepared for a board workshop or a COW meeting 2 or 3 months from now. And then over on the right-hand side, a high impact on staff. I can innocently ask a question for data, and I may be requesting info that's not in any kind of report right now. And so I mean well when I ask for that info, but if we as a board, but as a board member, if I don't provide the opportunity for Superintendent TJ, or he may need to talk with the administrative staff member or the team or the CFO about how much time is it going to take to put together this new request or an extensive thing, before I know it, my innocent but info requests can lead to 30 hours of TJ's or 40 hours of the CFO's time. That might be exactly what you need as a board, might be what any board needs, but it's recognizing or building in some checks and balances to help take that into account. So I guess I would ask you as well, as you think about the various ways you ask for information, talk to your elbow partner for a couple of minutes. What comes to mind on this continuum or spectrum what's important for you to keep in mind as individually or a whole board you're making requests? Go ahead one more time with your elbow partner, please.
looking very productive, Harry. Very productive.
We're gonna remember you guys as the class act for elbow conversations. This is good.
We do road shows too if you need. It's so much per word though.
We're gonna remember that. So we had a spot where folks can weigh in, and then we'll take a look at a couple short scenarios, and then we'll move on to, okay, so what can you guys do with this information? So
You want me to
Thoughts?
go in the group?
that'd be great. Thank you.
Director Beck.
What we came up with was that, first of all, I have noticed that the board requests that we've been asking for are a lot less on the right side of this compared to especially the ones I'm thinking of that I used to ask about because we weren't getting information. And so to me, that suggests that anything that requires a lot of information and a lot of time and extensive research, we should be planning for those kinds of things. And they should be part of our normal processing, right? And so if somebody is asking for that information, then maybe that's a suggestion that we're not planning quite the right way, right? Maybe it's an indicator of how well we're planning. The other stuff, sort of the really easy to find stuff, I feel like we've gotten a lot better at having that at our fingertips now, because we get Friday reports, Dan calls us and tells us things, and we're discussing information before we vote on it. So I think ideally, any requests we make would be somewhere sort of towards the middle to the left, because if it's something that meets all of our other criteria and we're still asking for it, then there's something we haven't planned for, if that makes sense. Now, if somebody from the public asks a question, that's a different story.
But what you just described, Allison, I would jump in and to underscore that and say yes. So think about what you just said for the work of committees as they're planning, board committees. Think about what it means for your agenda planning committee, Dan, Linda, and TJ. You think about what it means for your finance committee. And I'm really encouraged. Lou and I both, we had texted each other a time or two while you guys were reacting about we're making adjustments in our work here tonight and finding ourselves impressed by the perspective that your whole board and superintendent are bringing to this conversation. And so again, if you start thinking about, I love your words about planful. It probably says something about our planning if great big reports that are going to be extensive. Now, again, it could always be that really important creative idea that I think somebody mentioned earlier, but a majority of the time, we ought to be able to see some things coming and plan for it. And when one comes up where you see the look on TJ's face like he just got handed 60 hours of work he wasn't planning on, that as a board, you ask him, you say, is this a whole new kind of report we're talking about here? Or the same thing that you might be asking of Shane or Jake or somebody else, is that if you can get in that habit or rhythm of asking when new things like that come up or something that seems like it might be bigger than you first thought, that's just going to help fine tune your leadership as a whole board and the reality of what you're asking for. Cool. Thank you. Somebody else.
Harry, we're going for the IASB Boardsmanship of the Year award. It's going to look real nice hanging on our wall.
I didn't even notice.
Absolutely. We would, school districts across Iowa would benefit from having periodic reflections like you guys are tonight. Inside, you can put your finger on already things you're doing that are making a difference, and also you're putting your finger on things that are next steps to strengthen your leadership and the kinds of information you're asking for. So another couple of groups, Dan, on this piece, and then we'll look at a scenario.
All right, Director Potts.
What we had discussed was that if in that first thing, amount of information and levels of detail, if you're leaning to the right. And on the second one, proximity to goals and priorities, if you're leaning to the left, then you would naturally and inherently find that your board requests would be reduced and would tend more towards the low. And I think that's what we have experienced, that because we are not lacking information and because our conversations and our questions are close to what our goals are, then the need for tremendous amounts of additional information isn't there. But we did discuss the fact that, there has to be a break. Somebody has to be able to put on a break and say to the person whose board request, that once they've looked at it and they say, okay, this is going to take 6 months from Sunday, and the information you're going to get by the time we're finished will be outdated. So that to educate the person making the board request and give them the opportunity to say, okay, then I didn't realize that, forget it.
And again, you take what you just said, Bruce, and put it together with Karen's idea earlier about and Bill's revisiting our whole summary list of requests on the Excel spreadsheet or wherever. You can take it next level that you just described, Bruce, and further hone and strengthen your work as a board team. Nicely said.
Although I also think there are some requests that they are going to take a lot of time. Kent has asked about the long-range plan, facility plan that we didn't have. I mean, that's taking a lot of time. And we understand it's going to take a lot of time, but there's a lot of steps in it. But that was a board request. The literacy presentation, that had to take time to put together. I had made a request about buses, that would we bring them back? Would we save money financially? That's a smart thing if that is the case. That's going to take time for somebody to make those comparisons. So I guess I don't want to say just because it's going to take time, it's not worth putting the time into it, because it's important information. I asked for a tag presentation because I think that's important. How are we putting kids in tag, putting them in, taking them out? How is the program being dealt with? That's important. And I'm sure it took a lot of time to get all that information to us. That's not to say, though, that it wasn't really valuable for us to know that stuff. So I guess to say, if you're going to the right, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's important information too.
Absolutely. And so thank you for sharing what you did, Karen. I think, again, losing my perspective as we think about your board soup team is just bring these to a conscious level and say, how can these help us as we make decisions and ask for information? And it isn't just inherently good or bad, one side of the continuum or not. It all depends, but just having at a conscious level, we think can be a helpful step. So thank you. Spot on with what you said. Yes. Any other groups that we missed out on this one, Dan?
Director Poston is antsy to answer.
Okay.
One thing Jamie and I talked about is that when a board request is made, we wouldn't have a problem with some interaction back from the superintendent. Just say, hey, what do you really want from this board request? And, what do you think you're going to gain from this board request? And then, again, I agree with Karen and her comments about time. I mean, if it takes time, but it's bringing valuable information, fine. But so I wouldn't, again, and I think Jamie agreed, that we would not be opposed to having some interaction back from the superintendent and say, okay, this is the time it's going to take, and this is what we'll gain from it, and then go from there. I've written numerous board requests, but they usually end up in the wastebasket. I don't turn them in. So sometimes I think I write a board request out of frustration, and then decide, well, it's really not going to accomplish anything by turning that board request in, so.
Thank you. That's all. I mean, think of the steps, you guys, and the kinds of next steps you've identified, from using the Excel sheet to Jamie and Kent's last comment about maybe some interaction on some of these things would be really helpful. I would be curious and ask TJ if he would share his initial thoughts from Kent and Jamie's comment there.
I think that's an excellent idea, to be honest with you. In October, when we started, the board request was, I mean, there were probably 25 of them out there. And one of the things we initially did is we sent memos to all people that were involved in that board request at the beginning. You know, if the board request said, you know, we want a tag presentation, we sent that to the person who's supposed to draft that with the date of when to do that on. So I really like the idea of saying, okay, this is going to fit nicely in our long-range facility plan, or this, we can take this to the finance committee, and then interacting, saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Are you okay with this board request? Whether it be through Dan and Linda or just direct interaction. I think that's definitely doable. One of the things that we've also done with board requests is we look at that spreadsheet that you're talking about, and we talk about it every agenda planning committee and the action items that are on there. I think it's also really important to, like we talked about, kind of prioritizing those kinds of ththings and matching them up, and then getting the feedback back and forth. I think that's an excellent idea. And I want to comment on what Director Poston said. He has walked into many board meetings and said, this is what's on my mind right now. So if I turn it in tonight or whatever. So I really appreciate that level of thought about it. And I think there definitely should be some interaction about those questions. And we have different modes to accomplish that. We can do it in a presentation at a board meeting, committee of the whole, our Friday reports, or just our board president and vice president getting information to the board members. But I think there potentially could be a protocol developed for that. I definitely think so. And
Thank you.
I really want to echo this is an indicator, because when I reflect back on board requests that have occurred, it's because there was a lack of planning. The question about would busing be cheaper or not, and things like that. I can definitely remember some of those board requests coming in, and I think that that's a great way to show an indicator of where we are. So I think that's appropriate. Long way around it.
And ultimately, where we're headed tonight in terms of a start on this is one of the last activities we're going to do is we're going to ask you to reflect back on the kinds of things you talked about tonight that might be potential next steps, agreements, protocols, whatever. We'll start to capture and codify those, and then Lou and I will clean them up, send them back to you. We think as fast as Lou Ann and I can write tonight, we're jotting down thoughts, and we'll ask you to help do that. We think it would be helpful for, in addition to these three continuums, to have a product, some ideas, some concrete things you can consider as next steps. So cool. I want to ask this. Brenda or Joe, if we would we're going to look at one other quick piece, page 3 in the material. Though several of your comments tonight have really been in regard to item 2, board requests, we also just want to reflect there are lots of other ways that you or other boards seek information. So number 2 is your board requests. And by the way, your process is more outlined than typically we see. So that's a kind of a unique step for you guys. But we want you to think about number 1, questions and needs come about before or after or during progress reports on literacy or other things. Questions during meetings, not only the 8 that we've been using in the tool, but other things that come to mind. Area 4, board committee and committee board conversations and information exchange. 5, you have an item we've observed sometimes with board reports. Insights, seeking info comes from that. And then there's questions outside of meetings. We think those probably capture the kind of the methods or the pathways that you seek and gain info? That's enough probably for tonight's purposes, but can you think of any others? And go ahead and talk to your elbow partner. This is just a 1-minute conversation. Is there anything else, other ways that you find yourself seeking and gathering more info to help you make decisions? Let's have them talk to elbow partners for a minute, Dan, just to quickly see if anything else pop out. Or it can just be whole group.
To waste staff time.
Okay, thank you. Anything else that popped out, as we could hear some folks were saying, well, it might be this, and you kind of gravitated back. But any groups, Dan, that have another one to think about? May or may not be.
Director Beck.
The only thing I could think of was, and it probably falls inside the questions outside of meetings. Occasionally, if there's some specific question about a process or who the contact is for something, you just ask either the board president or the superintendent or, the person in charge of that department directly. So occasionally there's a direct question, but it may fall under item 6. I don't know. This pretty much covers pretty much all the bases.
Thank you. Anyone else? Incidentally, we put this list together as Luann and I thought back on what we had observed over the last 4 or 5 months, different ways we saw and heard you in meetings, seeking questions, seeking information. All right.
Hey,
Then,
Gary,
yeah, please.
I had one thing, and then I think Bill Decker had something.
Great.
I don't know where this one would fall into, but I know sometimes, like when as board members, we ask of questions of staff and stuff, but sometimes I don't know where that fine line is where we go to like a department head and ask something, but then the superintendent's not aware of it. And then they're, obviously they get their marching orders from the superintendent and they should be working on something, but then it's not getting done because they're looking into something that the board member had asked. So I don't know where that fits in, but somewhere along the way, we had to include the superintendent, I guess, on some of that stuff so that at least when that staff member is not doing their assigned duties and they're not getting it done, then it doesn't make them look bad like, hey, how come you're not doing your job, that what I told you to do while I'm over here researching this that they weren't even aware of.
Yeah, no, that's a good one, Dan, and I think I'm gonna seize the moment for a couple minutes. So Brenda and or Joe, if you would move back to page 10, and then I would ask participants in the meeting, and we'll circle back and weave Bill's comments in or thoughts as well, Dan. But back to page 10. And I want to slide down to the who, that number, item number 2. So if you can scroll that up a little further. Yeah, it plays into what you're asking, Dan. So a couple thoughts, because Luann and I included this tool, a communication framework guideline, and one of the areas is the second area. So, who communicates information directly to the board? By the way, we did not prepare this for you guys. We actually prepped it a couple years ago for work with some other boards and got pretty favorable feedback, so we're continuing to use it. So we're sharing it with you tonight. So who communicates info directly to the board? When board members have questions, where do they go and seek info? Couple thoughts. And I'm going to just ask you to think about it this way for a minute. Sometimes, as Lou and I work with boards, when we touch on this topic, somebody will say, well, I don't want to get all the info just from the soup, and I understand that. There are some benefits to hearing from others, but I want to ask you to suspend the thinking for about 2 minutes and think about this way. So you hired a superintendent, TJ. He's your designated administrative leader. And so what I want to ask you to think about is the better he understands your board's need for information, the better he understands what your information needs are, the better he can help ensure that he and or his staff are providing and anticipating what you need. And I think you've been able to see that play out this year as your board leadership, superintendent, and whole board have been able to get into a cadence or rhythm. Here's the other thing, and Dan, I think it's probably embedded a little bit of what you asked. Sometimes it might be easier. I'm going to share a couple examples. If I serve on board committee X, and that committee has pretty ongoing access every month, every quarter, to the HR director and somebody else who's on that committee, I'm going to come to know them and be comfortable who they are. And it might be real easy, and I'm well-intentioned. I reach out to them for some info that I think they can quickly find for me, which would be good. But think about it from superintendent's perspective. Think about it from the staff member's perspective. So I, Harry, board member, I go to that HR director or that curriculum person. I ask for X or Y. What I don't know is that superintendent TJ, the month before, 2 weeks before, he or the administrative team may have just set some new priorities that really need to be my number one. Now a board member comes to me innocently and well-intentioned asking for info. That creates some confusion for me or awkwardness as a staff member. If I don't provide the info, how do I look? Help me out here. A board member comes to me and I say, I can't provide that info to you, or I'm hesitant because I don't even know if the soup's aware of that. Where does that put me with the board member? Awkward, right? Awkward. I might even look like I'm uncooperative. So we as an association tend to say to boards, you just want to talk through that with your superintendent. If you haven't, when there are information requests, how might that best be handled in a way that still allows the superintendent to be aware of those needs and forecast and speculate. He or she, in your case, he can be weighing that with other priorities that he and that administrator or staff member have already set, etc. It's just important to keep in mind. So that leads to the first 3 bullets on this who section. And just going to ask you to just read those first 3 bullets. If it feels like I'm doing a little bit of a hard sell, I am, just in terms of thinking about the implications. So one more thought, and then just going to ask you to kind of react a little bit. And Dan, I'm glad you brought this up. You just didn't know you were going to take us to the back of the packet, but it's good stuff. So
I always jump ahead.
that's all right. It plays out differently. So you're not going to hear Luann or me say you ought to do X. In one district we work with, the superintendent would prefer, and he or she and the board talk about it. And the soup would ask that board members would start with those requests of the soup, so he or she can just be aware of what the information needs are, and they might find themselves saying, gee, this is info that the whole board should have. In the next district, depending on size and how it's organized, the soup might have talked with the board, and they agree that board can make requests of senior level administrators, but gives the superintendent a heads up first, so that in case it conflicts with priorities the soup and staff member have talked about. In the next district, superintendent board talk about it, and their plan is that a board will talk to senior administrators, but know that senior administrator, that district administrator, is going to give the soup a heads up. It runs various ways. I would be curious, with TJ being new this year, what works best from his vantage point, and then you guys likely may need some continued conversation around this. So TJ, you're going to put you on the spot a little bit. Your best hopes and why?
So the current situation that we're in right now, when information flows the best is when it's coming through the board president to myself. In our current situation, I find our leadership in being put what you just briefly described as an awkward situation. That's exactly what happens when board members email people directly. And I do find myself sideways with that. So a balance of that, I know that the administrative team, if they are emailed by a board, will immediately contact me. And the purpose is to make sure that everybody's on the same page to get the right information. So for me, in our current situation, I think that's what works the best. The flowing through the superintendent, because a lot of times it's like, absolutely, will you please make that phone call? And then I will follow up with that administrator. Or it's like, or it is, I will get you that information. Or absolutely, that we'll share it. Because sometimes, does everybody need that information? Does one person need that information? That's where I find a difficult balance with that. And so right now, I think the place should be, particularly with the workload that we have on our administration, that I think that would be my recommendation right now if I were making a recommendation. And yes, you did put me on the spot, Harry.
I did. This is where you say, I know where you live, and I'll find out. But it isn't intended as it's all done, but want to get that out there. My guess is you probably would benefit from some more conversation around that, and whether that's whole board soup, board leadership and soup talk, and then come back and talk some more with the whole board. There's more than one way to tackle that. Your thoughts, please.
Director Smith.
Russ?
I think it's important to go through one channel. I was going to touch on this before, and this is kind of takes me back to early in my first term. We didn't always have the board request format that we have now. We simply had a line that says, what is your request? Do you want it as an agenda item or information? And that was it. And we had people going off in just on their own, where the rest of the board was not, in or supporting that. We finally, because we had so many requests that were out in left field, and TJ can probably remember getting some, just ridiculous amounts of workload on some strange board requests that we had to come up with something to, that's why we started asking for a second and why you want the information. Because again, it's as board members, it's the consensus of the board that leads the district, not individual board thoughts and opinions. So my concern would be if we're going out and soliciting information on our own, we're bypassing that entire channel and negating the reasons why we started asking for seconds on board requests and developing that board consensus so that because you may have one thing that you feel is fairly important, but if the rest of the board says, what in the world do we need to focus on that right now for? It's not the time or the place. It is what it is.
Thanks. Others, please.
Director Hayes.
And even going a little further with what Director Snyder said, I can remember hours being put into a project for research, and it wasn't exactly what was wanted, and all that time was wasted. So I think it would be helpful to kind of streamline the process, and if we ran it by superintendent, you know, he may have that information that he could just give us in a Friday report versus, you know, going through hours and hours trying to pull up information.
As one of the newer board members, but that wasn't clear when I got on the board, how I asked my questions. And what I found is I had a financial question, so I went to the financial person who answered it. And the next time I did it, I was told, nope, that's not the way you do it. I went, okay. So then I questioned it at the board meeting, and then I was told, nope, that's not how you do it. So it's like, give me directions and make sure anybody new on here knows exactly how this process works, because I don't want to be called out that I did it wrong when I was never told how I'm supposed to do it. So I didn't know you go through the superintendent all the time. Like here, if I had a question from HR, I would have thought to go to HR. Why would I mess around? And, you know, I came from a different, in the union, I wouldn't go through the superintendent. I would go to the HR director if I had that question. So we're not clear to people coming on the board how they're supposed to do this. So.
And that's another good point, Karen, which is part of why it made our list for tonight up in terms of for any board we're working with to say, okay, what are next steps here? And this would be it ends up being a timely topic in lots of districts. Thank you for your comments. Yes. Whom else, Dan?
Hold on one sec. I actually made the comment because I know I've been guilty of this a lot, and with previous superintendents and things like that. But I think it all revolves back, and it's a recurring theme with the lack of information, and there was a lack of trust, for lack of a better word. I think we've been getting a lot more information, it's rebuilding that relationship. So those things are kind of working themselves out. And I completely agree with what Director Klein-Jerome said. We need to work on some kind of an onboarding process for new board members and things like that. And maybe that's something that we work with you guys on. I know when you run for the board, you have the initial IASB training, but as you have said, Harry, boards are different in different areas on how they operate and things like that. So, I mean, that's definitely something that from our end is something that we should work on as an onboarding process. I know we have that issue within the district itself, but at the board also, because you should know who you can go to for different things and things like that.
Yeah. And again, the questions, the exercises for tonight, those 3 continuums, they're all in the spirit of, as we said at the beginning, helping you guys think through, you know, over the next 6-8 months, what are next steps for us? Well, guess what happens in 6 months? There's a board election. So that is exactly right. A big piece, an important element of tonight's conversation is looking forward, including strengthening clarity so that as new members potentially would come on in the fall, they're brought into, as Karen's, a different experience than Karen had. They're brought into from the get-go, knowing the procedures and processes. Anyone else around this area?
I believe Director Beck had something.
Oh, I was just going to say, it also has improved a lot because we have a superintendent who responds when we have these kinds of questions. And I think that was a big part of it. I remember my first year here, anytime I had a question, I didn't get responses from the superintendent. I didn't get responses from the board president. And so this is, this has changed dramatically. And I think that's one of the reasons why in the past people would go directly to somebody, as Dan just said, because they weren't getting the information they needed. But now that we have information, A, we're getting it in meetings, and B, we have a responsive set of people who are supposed to be providing that information.
Absolutely. And what you also have is as you continue to strengthen your processes, that and there's clarity on that. Then when there's a breakdown and there isn't responsiveness with data, as a board, the superintendent is your direct report. And so then you take it up with him or her in terms of as part of their performance reviews, if something isn't happening as it should. Dan, a little bit earlier before we went off on this questions outside the board meeting, you mentioned Bill, I think, was wanting to share something a little bit earlier. Can we circle back on that for a moment or two?
Yeah, my comment was back when we were on page 3 and talking about the different tools that are available to the board. And I think it's fairly new to have the board committees that are operating the way that they are operating. That's my impression. I don't guess I know that for absolute certain, but I would just encourage the board to continue to do that with the same kind of veracity that I see right now. The robust conversations that I get to be a part of in the finance committee are really good, and I think that is that is what it takes to make sure that the financial situation of the district stays as it is, or as it has become, and it shouldn't just be something that, boy, we had that committee when we were in trouble, and then it kind of goes away. And I know, Kent, you've said flat out that that'll never happen again. And, I hope that the entire board agrees with that that's a great communication tool between the board and the superintendent that allows for some really robust conversation. So I just encourage that to continue.
Thank you. Okay, let's take a look at a scenario, and Lou, we could either run with that first or that second scenario. I'll give you a minute to queue up, pick one in a minute. And for board, I would ask you to do this. I think what you should have in front of you, in addition to the packet, I think you should have one freestanding page with those 3 continuums. Do you have that as a freestanding separate piece, Dan?
Yes.
Okay, so when Lou guides you to a scenario, just in one hand, she'll guide you what page of scenario to look at, and your other piece in front of you, have that sheet with the 3 continuums again. And we're just going to kind of dabble a little bit, and I'll let her set this up.
Thanks, Harry. Hi, everyone. And by the way, Dan, thanks for acknowledging that you're willing to go on the show, take your show on the road, because don't forget, convention's coming up and our call for presentations is open. So you guys have some great stories to tell. Just be aware, I'm always looking for people who are willing to help support the learning of others. And my dog is about to bark, so I apologize. She's been quiet this whole time until now. If you take a look at page 4, Joe, if you don't mind scrolling to the scenario, I'm going to give a plug to one of my favorite people, and I think yours, Gary Sinclair. There we go. Thank you. This is something you may or may not have heard Gary say working with you. He said it a lot when he was a staff member working with us. You can do anything you want, just not everything you want. Finance is a finite resource. Well, so is time and energy. So this scenario is a quick one. We're going to have you think about some of the learnings that you and the reflections that you've done, deep provocative reflections, and we're just going to apply it to this fun activity. But let's look at the questions to consider first. As an anticipatory set to kind of get your thinking going. You're going to be thinking about, after you read the scenario, which of the three continuums apply to the situation and how. And then what steps might you take as a board and superintendent to help keep the meetings and discussion focused on the main thing, your goals and priorities. Since Harry's been doing a lot of talking and that's been awesome, Harry, by the way, and I don't really want to read this. Would somebody be willing to read the scenario for the rest of the group just to hear, just for fun? And Dan, would you help me pick somebody?
I would love to pick your victim. Superintendent Schneckloff.
Oh, thanks, TJ, for being voluntold.
Yes.
Okay.
The Dreamfield Board has a traditional standing agenda item entitled Board Member Reports and Suggestions. Over the past 2 years, the time spent on this item has grown exponentially. Board members mention ideas they have heard from neighboring districts, facility flaws they have seen while attending district events, parental suggestions for additions to the curriculum, and teacher concerns about building level issues. During the last meeting, after a lengthy board discussion, the superintendent, feeling overwhelmed and concerned, said, "I have a list of 14 things you've asked me to look into tonight. Each of the requests you offered sound equally important. I'm not sure where to go from here. What is it you really want me to focus on?" ?
And TJ, we did not ask you about this scenario, I promise. And I did not know you were going to be the one to read it. So thank you so much. So which of the three continuums apply to this situation and how? Let's go ahead and have you go back to your small groups and just talk for a couple minutes, 3 or 4 minutes about the continuum and which of those really apply the most directly and how. Do you need a little bit more time, or are you guys ready to share out?
I think everybody's ready, Luann.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Let's have you help us out and just get some thinking about which of the three continuums apply and how, and why is that important?
Director Klein, Jerome?
Well, I'll tell you, no,
Whoever leaves the room winds up in charge.
really, yeah. I need a little break. Goals and priorities, if you tied it to your goals and priorities, this wouldn't keep going on and on. And suggestions, again, this wouldn't happen in Iowa because you can't have new business. You have to publish your agenda, so this would not be a discussion we would have.
Correct, except every once in a while we'll have boards that might kind of accidentally slip off into that. But you're absolutely right. We have to be really careful about the open meetings law. Can you talk, Karen, a little bit more about the goals, though? I think that was really important. Can you talk about what your thinking was around that?
Well, of all these 14 things, they probably are not all focused on goals and priorities. So if that becomes the priority on what you're going to discuss, then you would eliminate some of this stuff. It has to stay focused on what are your goals and priorities.
Absolutely. So using that as a filter, thank you. Again, you only have so much finite time. You only have so many minutes that you meet per year. There's only so much staff time. What are you going to be spending the bulk of your time on? Thank you. Dan, how about another group? Or was there
Klein,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'll move faster next time, Luann. I apologize.
You're right, Dan.
Well, we talked about the same thing. I mean, basically 14 things. You have to prioritize, just like the title says. You can do anything you want. You just can't do everything you want. Which topics align with your goals, which topics might have some information that's readily available versus some that are going to take 40 hours, 40 man hours to put together. As far as like which one of these, I mean, every one of them kind of applies to all three of them in some sort of, fashion as far as, determining, but it's got to be the priority. Like on the top when it said, over the past 2 years, time spent on this item has grown exponentially. Well, I would think on, some of that, the information is probably readily available then if they've been working on it for 2 years. 14 things all over the place. It reminds me of, like I was talking about earlier, my first go round on the board, we would have some strange conversations and strange requests.
Thank you. And I think this goes back to, I think it was you, Allison, that talked about it. If the time has grown exponentially, there's an indicator that there's probably some need for planning or for the processes to be adjusted a little bit. All of these, this scenario applies to all three scenarios, and as all three continuums. And as Harry and I were planning this, there's real synergy, as you've just noticed, across those continuums. So if one of them is going to require a lot of, information, it's probably going to take a lot of staff time. We could hear you talking about those things in your small groups. You've already started to identify, I think, Harry, don't you agree, some protocols that we can start to generate. But let's just talk out loud, and then maybe we can move to that, Harry. It's up to you. But let's look at the second question, and maybe we can just have a discussion. What are a couple steps that the team could take? Thank you, Joe, to keep the meetings more focused on the main things, or your goals and priorities, or the DE accreditation report. What might be a couple steps? And we'll just have you just talk out loud, and it might be something that you've already identified.
Director Beck.
The one thing that we said was something that I think you just mentioned, actually, Luann, planning, right? Because each of these things really fits into a broader topic that would be of interest to the entire community and is important for the district for the board to discuss. So, for example, facility flaws, that's part of long-range planning. Suggestions for curriculum, that's part of curriculum discussions, right? So most of these things can fit into broader topics of interest and can be incorporated into those. And then others are things that are outside of what we've been calling the chain of command. Building level problems that teachers have should be going to their principals and then work their way up. And so if teachers are bringing concerns to the board, that suggests either there's a breakdown in what's going on at the building level and there's a problem that needs to be fixed, or people aren't aware of the appropriate way that information is supposed to flow.
And so you just mentioned two really important things. One, it goes back to what Bill was saying about, or I'm not sure, Bill, you talked about the calendar and the spreadsheet. Allison, that is what what you guys talked about earlier, is that information is important, but it might not be timely at this point. It might be more of a long-term need, but that goes back to the discussion that you could have with TJ and administration about when is that going to be most timely, because it may be coming up, in the spring. But that's something that you can determine together. Harry, do you want to make a comment about, I think Allison just brought up a really good point about addressing concerns, because that certainly plays into this.
Yeah, it sure does. And Allison, as you acknowledged a couple of key pieces. Usually, often when the issues are coming, when they've not been tackled, maybe at the building first, that may be an issue itself, why it isn't being tackled there. But also, often it's about understanding what the process is, and then explaining and being able to explain consistently. So when all 7 of you as board members can act with consistency in guiding folks to try to resolve issues and have them addressed closest to where the original issue is, that in itself is a helpful step. So it doesn't matter. It's not dependent on whether they talk to Dan or Bruce or Linda, that they would get a similar response or answer, which is built on the premise of guiding them to try to resolve it through the existing channels first. Translation, sure, you politely listen, all those sort of things, but the board isn't the first step in helping remind them. The board isn't the first step in resolving issues. Lou, what do you think if we take a run with small groups at their initial ideas for some of these protocols?
I think they've already generated several of those already.
Absolutely. So we'll just ask them to quickly codify them. So Joe or Brenda, if you tee up page 9 of the packet, board members, if you go to page 9, and we're just going to ask you with your elbow partner, each group of elbow partners come up with 1 or 2 ideas. So here's an example. Yes, I'm stealing somebody's thunder. But one of the things that popped up tonight, when I think about protocols or agreements, what will help us strengthen how we do business around information flow? Here's one I heard from you, that may be periodic, that the whole board would get the spreadsheet with the running requests, the board requests, and that you would periodically review those requests while having these 3 continuums in mind. Where are we on these requests? How do they sync up with those 3 continuums? That'd be one of Harry's examples. You talked about several other things that might be helpful. So would you generate with your elbow partner 1 or 2 ideas you'd take away from tonight that can be considered as protocols or agreements that will enhance or improve how information flows and when board members have the need for more info? Clear enough on the task? Go ahead and pair up. Dan will ask you in about maybe 5 to 7 minutes to let us know if folks are ready to share. And if a group gets on a roll and has 2 or 3, let it happen. We need somebody to be your scribe or recorder for your group. Good, Dan?
We still have a couple groups working. They're
Not a
putting in
prob-
extra work, Harry.
Not a problem.
See, those are the people that were the problem before.
You're, we're making a note so you get overtime checks, okay?
What's time and a half of 0?
Yeah, dude, 0 plus, so your checks will be 0 plus. I shouldn't make a comment like that on a meeting that might be publicized, because there could be folks who think you do get paid even though you don't, so
There are people that do think we get paid.
I bet. Maybe while we can wait another minute or two, or maybe a one group, Dan, could start sharing. Lou and I are capturing notes as you're talking.
We're good.
Okay. I think
Okay.
Director Passion was in such a hurry to get done. I think we're going to call on him first.
That sounds great, and I'm gonna ask a favor. Whoever the recorder was, would you please get this page, tear it out, give it to Brenda so she can scan them and email them to Lou and me tomorrow, and we'll kind of do a little tinkering with them and see what we have.
PG.
All right, go for it, please.
Well, what we discussed as far as information flow and also making the meetings flow better. Again, the agenda committee is going to be important on that as far as how the meetings go. As far as information flow, should go through the superintendent first, with follow-up after that. And then also the information has to match up with your goals and priorities. And then the other thing that Jamie and I talked about as far as the committees, in the past, Jamie commented that a lot of times there were committees. There wasn't a finance committee, but there were other committees, and no information came from those committees. And as Harry has mentioned numerous times, the committees are there to serve the board. And so that information has to flow from the committees to the boards. Otherwise, there's no point in having a committee. And I think that was about it.
Thank you, and thanks for that underscoring, Kent, that the committee works to serve the board, not the other way around. Cool. Somebody else?
Director Potts.
We listed several things. We said maintaining the Friday updates from the superintendent, maintaining Brenda's updates if something occurs in individual school buildings, creating a board orientation for new board members on communication protocols. And we said continue to have the board reports and committee reports at our board meetings.
Thank you. Somebody else?
Brenda. I'm just kidding. Director Beck.
We said the same thing as Director Potts and Klein-Jerome said about a specific protocol for new board members on particularly communication, but basically we should have a protocol in place for new board members and exactly what happens when they are onboarded. And then the other one we came up with was sort of an agreement for how information comes to the board. So based on sort of like what Director Poston said, sometimes he writes board requests but then doesn't file them, right? Because he thinks about who needs this information and what does this information mean. And so we talked about creating a matrix or a flow chart for evaluating your questions. So like, is this information you're requesting for a constituent? Is this something that comes out of, reading the documents for the next discussion? Is this something that only you need to know, or is this something that everybody needs to know? Which will help you sort of figure out the best route for that request and how important that information is. And then also a section on how much time will it take to acquire this information.
And Allison, are those questions you just shared, because I couldn't write fast enough, Lou probably can, are those on your notes, those are sample questions?
Yes.
That'll be really helpful as well. Yes, great. Thank you.
To add one thing we talked about was, is there a loop that needs to be closed? So sometimes if this is something that the whole board needs, does this need to go on a board meeting, Friday report, things of that nature? Because we want, one of the things we talked about is sometimes when a constituent asks you a question, do all board members need an answer to that? You know, like all of you have been contacted individually about the end of school or things of that nature. So to give you information to help answer the constituents is very valuable. So closing that loop was really important too.
Great. Thank you. I think we have one or two groups left yet, right, Dan?
Yes, Director Hayes and mine, we had, and I'll let you add whatever you had. Onboarding for new board members, front-loading board members, and an annual meeting to discuss and critique, if needed, the protocols and agreements, so then everyone knows what's going on. And then if questions come up between meetings, send questions to the board secretary to be forwarded on to the superintendent and the response sent to all board members. The reason I say that is we have people that will send emails, but they send them directly to, it's the same email, it's copied and pasted, and it's addressed individually to each board member because it's, I don't know how to say it the right way, but they're looking for a different response for each person. And
Sure.
and some of them, you know, it's they take agitation training and stuff like that, and I get that. And they're just looking for ways to hang us out on giving them bad information. I mean, it's just the reality of things. But if we're all on the same page, putting the same message out there, then it's no one's getting hung out to dry. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
The only thing different that I would even like to add a little bit to it was with the front loading of the information at the agenda committee meetings. Oftentimes there are people that are on board that are really familiar with whatever the topic is, and they're there basically to kind of filter through potential questions that could come up. That's how we get a lot of the extra information, because people are anticipating these questions. And
That's what you mean, Linda, by the front loading, the anticipating the questions?
Yes.
Got it. Yeah. Well, and again, from our observation, with those sample 8 questions you guys have been working with, and as TJ has shared those with administrators, that helps that front loading process. Now, again, those aren't questions for life, but they were starters. So cool. All right.
And we just have Bill and Shane now to go.
All right.
So just a couple that haven't been said, because I mean, several things that people have said have been very, very common, but I think it was mentioned, but I do think it's one of the keys to being a staff member is remembering that both staff and community members are directed to go through the chain of command. If you become the way they can ask you a question and they can get an answer, they're going to come to you every single time. And I don't think that's the role that you want to, you know, at your previously aforementioned 0 salary, you probably don't want to be the person that's doing that when there are people that are paid to do that. So I think that's a really important protocol to make sure is in place. Just one quick little suggestion that I had is maybe we figure out a way to put those 3 continuums in some just real small box on the board request form, so that, you know, when you're putting it in, when you're putting your board request together, you're thinking about, is this something that the information is lacking, or have we had a bunch of information about this already, or, you know, each continuum. And then the last thing that I said, I think there are some times when the questions that fall into the high extensive research and time, many requests, they really should turn into calendar items that we put into that working document of the board calendar. And I'll use the example, the facilities plan. I mean, I totally, absolutely love the fact that Kent pushes that, because it has to happen for this district. It has to. I mean, you've seen in your observations that the district kind of behind the curve. And so keep pushing it, but really what we should do is put it on the calendar, and so that there is an update going all the time. At the last finance committee, we had started some conversation. TJ has had some conversation on that and started to get information and start the beginnings of what a plan should look like. That should just become something regular because it's a big need. This isn't going to be we're going to put a lot of research into the answer once and then it's over. This is going to be a constant. In fact, it'll get to be more and more an item. So I just think that's an example that if you have something that's that big, consider whether it's something that you put on and then you start to build on and just gain more institutional knowledge is how I put it, but just gain institutional knowledge so that every time it comes on the calendar, you're gaining more knowledge about it and you just keep building to the point where you won't have that request anymore because you'll have all of that information.
Great. So I have a one-sentence comment. We started an hour and 55 minutes ago. I think I know we'll finish before 2 hours. If you go longer, it won't be on Luann and me. Luann, any comments from you?
Well, I have a lot, but I'm going to just say there was one that I heard mentioned earlier that I didn't capture. And if I didn't capture it, I apologize. But I think it was if a board request comes to the meeting that there's interaction between the superintendent. He has time to respond. Did somebody share that and I not capture that?
Earlier this evening, I think that came out of Kent and Jamie's group, their elbow group.
So is it okay if I put that down on the list?
Yeah, you're the recorder for us. Go ahead and they'll let us know if they don't like it.
Thank you.
Anyway, good. Thank you.
That'll be just fine with us, Luann. And if you missed anything else, you can find the video of our board meeting on our YouTube channel.
Okay. Or you could start a new procedure, IASB requests, and you can send them to us. How's that? Hey, thank you so much. Seriously. We hope this was helpful to you. Listening to you talk was really powerful insights. And I think the most refreshing part for me after 20 years of doing this work is listening to your ability to self-reflect and share some things that should help you continue to grow and move forward. Good for you guys. Thanks for the opportunity and for leaning on ISB and inviting us in to work with you.
Thank you, Harry and Luann, for taking up your Monday night to work with us. We greatly appreciate it.
Couldn't think of a better way. We'll see you. Thanks again.
I think Superintendent Schneckloff had something you wanted. You're grabbing your microphone. You don't want to say nothing? Okay.
We're good. I'm good.
All right,
I think
we're
it was a
good.
great meeting.
Did anyone have anything else for Harry or Luann? I think that was it. You guys are off the hook and have a great rest of your night.
Good night.
Thanks. You guys have done tremendous work these last 2 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If we could get that in writing, that would be great.
We're going to borrow your advice. Just take the recording and send it wherever you need to. Provide it with whoever you want to share it. We'll see ya.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
All right. With that being said, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Hey, Dan.
I want to keep the back of it.